There's a lot of topics to cover within the breast cancer community. In A Beautiful Self, we bring in the experts to inform, to take your questions, and to inspire.
Tune in Tuesdays at 12 on Facebook and Instagram Live to join the conversation.
I'm Paula Leach, certified sex therapist and instructor. Join me as we talk about sex, sexuality, and mental health.
See you there.
Hi, everyone. It is Jillian.
And Michelle.
And welcome to Tip Tuesday. We are starting a little early today, and I don't know why I'm whispering, but basically we have an amazing guest today. Paula Leach, she is our return guest. She is a sex therapist who helps individuals achieve a greater sense of intimacy to create this thriving, evolving connection to self and others. And yeah, we have a lot of questions for her because really we wanted to focus on mental health and sex. But what happened last minute with Paula, I can stop whispering, I know, Paula, because we're clear across town.
You can.
Okay. Is that Paula has babies and she didn't have her, anyone to help her today. So they're down for a nap. So we're going to try to get everything in before they wake up because then she has to run. It's life. It happens. So
we've all been there. We've all been there. When they go to sleep, we get busy.
I'm too type A for this. Plans cannot fall through. I count on my structure.
This is life. This is what the kids are for, to tell you there's no structure. You just are here to serve them.
That's true. They are the boss. For sure.
They're the boss, man. I don't have kids, but I have fur babies. They're the boss. Anyway, well, listen, here we go. I want to get into it because we don't know how much time we have. And this is really important. I think that, right now there is a lot of focus, Paula, on mental health, as there should be. Yeah. So my question to you is, how closely related is mental health and sex?
Sure. So I think it's, this is a tricky answer because it's complicated. It's always complicated, right? But I think that, when I think about the people that I work with, they're always really surprised when the experience of therapy, they come in with sexual issues, but we end up talking about their sense of self-worth, their relationship to their family of origin, the ways that they take care of themselves. I mean, we talk about so much more, their attachment history, all of this stuff, because sex and sexuality are so deeply intertwined into who we are and all of the other aspects. There's no sort of like separating it out and compartmentalizing it. So it is very deeply woven into our mental health. It is a really big part of who we are as humans, as animals on this planet. And so, when I'm training therapists to do this work, it's, when you meet clients, it's okay, food, shelter, water, sex, relationships, because this is part of the fabric of who we are. So it's very deeply connected. And then also, though, depending on what our relationship to sex and sexuality is, it can be more or less profound on a day-to-day basis. And what I mean by that is, if you are someone who sexuality and sexual expression and sexual play are your primary means of connecting with other people, of feeling close and vulnerable with other people, and then things shift and maybe you're not feeling great about who you are, or maybe things are going awry in your relationship, this may potentially have a greater impact on your day-to-day life versus someone who sex and sexuality are not necessarily the primary means of connecting to themselves and to to other people. It's part of it, but not everything. And so they may be less impacted by any fractures in this space.
That's really interesting because, every couple is different. Every human is different. Some couples have been together, and the fundamentals of their relationship is not based on that physical. Right. Yeah. So you're right. It depends on what your kind of norm is. So in the cancer community, there's a lot of changes, as we know. Right. And I think that one of the things that women come out with, even I'm sure men too, is what is this issue, and what can we do about, maybe someone who's experiencing that lack of physical or emotional intimacy with a partner. Like, what are steps they should take?
Sure. And that can be so, so hard. And, I think through the course of our lives, things happen, and sometimes really huge things happen that can really make massive shifts in our relationship to our partners and to ourselves. And so if we're feeling like the intimacy has changed, what I encourage folks to do is first off, I always think it's a good idea to take risks in your relationship, right? And sometimes they pay off and sometimes they don't, right? But we'll never know unless we do. And so one way to not make any changes, to not move forward, is to not do anything. So we have to be, really strategic and artful in how we approach tough conversations. And I think that, again, taking those risks, a lot of the time, if you're in a safe relationship, physically safe, emotionally safe relationship, whatever that means for us, are worthwhile things to do. But I also like to encourage folks to really look at their definition of intimacy. How do they define what it is and how it looks in their lives, for themselves individually? How do they cultivate intimacy within themselves, but then also in their relationships? Because I think a lot of times we aren't necessarily cognizant of it, but we have really narrow definitions of intimacy, really narrow definitions of what sex and sexuality is, what eroticism is, and how we can cultivate those things. And so, when we're going through tough times with our partner, and when we've been through a lot of change, and we're putting pieces back together, and maybe we're grieving aspects of ourselves, taking a look at, okay, how do I define what intimacy is? And maybe some elements of what I typically go to that cultivate that feeling in my life are less present right now, but what are some other ways that I might connect to that feeling? And they could be more nuanced ways. We can build on more nuanced or subtle ways of cultivating intimacy. So taking risks and having conversations, hard conversations, and expanding our definition of what intimacy is and can
I
look
like that you said the word safe. Because I think that that's so important, because what we hear a lot in our community is, it's not so bad if you have a partner that's very understanding and wants to work with you and your issues, but then there's a lot of couples where the partner's not, and that can cause a lot of strife. So I like that you said that the safe word, like what feels safe to you also. So it kind of leads me to another question. It's a twofold question. Ready?
Sure.
Okay, twofold. So one is, how important is it in understanding your own body and its needs, right? And should intimacy just be organic? So basically, number one, do you just let it happen, or do you have to have an understanding going in? And then number two, sorry, this is a long question, is why do you think people are so uncomfortable exploring their own bodies? Not everybody's coupled.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay, so remind me of the first one again.
So the first one is how important, that was a long one, sorry, is how important is it
knowing
understanding our body, or should it just be organic, like let it flow?
So I feel fairly strongly that it's really important that we understand our bodies, because they're constantly shifting and changing. And so what can happen, or what tends to happen when we just hope or expect it to show up organically, is that often we have expectations that are based off of previous versions of ourselves, or previous ways that our bodies might have responded or interacted with others, or or responded to our own touch, that aren't here today, or aren't relevant today. And so that leads to a lot of disappointment. It can lead to a lot of disappointment. It can lead to a lot of frustration. So I think it is absolutely a wonderfully worthwhile journey to get to know your body in an ongoing way, with intentionality, to understand how it shifts and changes. And I think that honestly, as we talked about earlier, we're going to go through really huge things in life. As we move through, we may suffer injury, we may go through cancer, there's all kinds of things that happen, and there are these huge shifts force us to come into our experience in a different way. And that can be traumatizing. It is traumatizing. And I just think that I try to encourage people to, along the way, bear in mind that we are constantly changing and that every day things shift, so that when these really huge things happen that really sort of like, oh my gosh, knock us off kilter, we still have a process for engaging with ourselves in that way, and learning about ourselves in this way.
Do you think that connects? I'm sorry, I mean to interrupt you,
okay.
but do you think that connects to mental health? Because I think generationally, self-love is looked at differently. I think the older generations you go into, they're like, oh, no self-care, no self-love, no personal stimulation. You know, you don't talk about those things, but blah, 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 blah. Right,
Yeah.
Michelle. Everything is like, don't talk about it, don't talk about it.
Yeah.
I do think it's a generational thing. And I think the younger generation is much freer and more open about these conversations, and it's all good. But do you think that that suppression of self attaches itself to mental health and how we feel?
Absolutely. Oh my goodness. I mean, I feel like when we neglect ourselves, when we push aside ourselves, when we, this idea that like, oh, I put everyone before myself. And now we know, right? Like our understanding of this position has shifted. And we know that being self-effacing in relationships doesn't work. We need, relationships demand more and more of us over time. That's what intimacy is. And that's what it looks like. And so absolutely, I feel like a major cause of a lot of the big struggles that people go through around anxiety and depression are related to having lost themselves and therefore not really knowing themselves anymore. And that causes a host of difficulties, right? Like, I've lost myself. I don't really know myself. So how do I trust myself? How do I make hard decisions in life? How do I take these risks if I don't have any kind of internal compass that I can really rely on?
Right.
So I think it's hugely important.
Well, then let me go back to the other one, the other question, which is, why do you think people can be so uncomfortable with self-exploration? Like, they're like, no, I would never.
Oh my gosh. Well, yeah. Well, we've been fed a bunch of really funky ideas around it. I mean, so we've been given a bunch of really funky ideas around what it means to touch our bodies, to enjoy our bodies, to take pleasure in our bodies. And we've been given a lot of really funky ideas about what it means to be sexual as well, and whether or not that's okay, and whether or not that's something that we can allow ourselves to indulge in and enjoy. I get a lot of folks who come in who are really upset about the fact that they enjoy self-touch on a regular basis, and maybe multiple times a day even. And oh my gosh, I have to stop doing that. That's not okay. And what a game changer it is for them to understand that, like, not only is that not an addiction or a problem, unless it's literally interfering with your work, with your relationships, with your life, like I can't stop myself, I'm driving in the car type of a situation, which is so rare. It's so rare. But engaging with your body and engaging with pleasure after a stressful day at work, before a stressful day at work, is actually an act of self-love and self-care. Same thing as going for a jog after or before a stressful meeting at work. Like, just like total shift in perspective, because again, we're just given such conflicting sex negative messages growing up. And I do think it's interesting, and talking about the, sort of some of the older generations, they don't talk about it, but a lot of the older generations are having more sexual activity than the younger generations, because they have a different relationship to it. And a lot of the research is showing us that as we age, we become less inhibited, right? And so a lot of the things that we're self-conscious about and worried about start to fall off, and allows us to come closer in a lot of ways that are harder when we're younger. So it's interesting. They have a different relationship to it, but it doesn't mean that they're not indulging in it.
Right on. Okay. They just don't talk about it.
They don't talk about it. Exactly.
That's actually really interesting. You're right. I wasn't even thinking of it from that perspective. Just because they're not talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
I know.
Yeah.
These are like classic after 10 p.m. discussions.
They are. They
I'd love
are.
to do a Paula after
You
dark.
get
Oh my gosh, I'd love to do an after dark. Yes.
Yeah, Michelle, we have to do an after dark with her. Like we can get really real, and Instagram won't block us. I mean, Facebook won't block us.
Well, and you know, and there's a lot of like really great stuff in the sex therapy community now about our relationship to religion and to spirituality and how that has an impact on our sexuality. And there's a lot of folks, you know, who are heavily involved in different religious communities that are coming forward saying, hey, we've had kind of a sex negative attitude. Why don't we shift that? Like, let's shift that. Let's change the dialogue around it, because some of the funkier messages that we internalize growing up around sex and sexuality and whether it's okay to enjoy our bodies in this way, sometimes it comes from, you know, sort of religious, you know, ideology and dogma and that sort of thing. It can come from there. And so there's a lot of really great stuff around that these days as well. So that people who are very religious, I have a lot of very religious clients, can still feel really connected to their spirit and don't feel like they're having to part from it while also being a sexual person. Right?
Okay, cool. That's awesome. I'm sorry. I looked down at the, and it's like, oh, after dark show, anyone? Was that you, Michelle?
Yeah. I was like, who's in?
Yeah, that's fabulous. We would be in. So, you know, in the cancer community, especially the breast cancer community, or maybe the ovarian cancer community, because it's treated with hormone therapy in a lot of cases, not all, but in a lot of cases. The drugs tell your body to act a certain way, almost kind of like sit down, party over. Sorry, girl, you don't work that way. Physically, you may be 30, but now these drugs are making you act 70, which means there's a massive libido drop. And then you add all the other stuff on top of it. So my question to that is, what do you do when you're mentally there? Like mentally, you're like, yeah, I feel good. I want to engage with my partner. I want to engage with myself. I want to engage, but the body doesn't have a reaction.
Yeah. It's so frustrating when there's that disconnect like that. And, you know, I think that going back to what we had talked about earlier in expanding our ideas around what intimacy is, and this can be what intimacy looks like emotionally in our day-to-day life, and then what physical sexual intimacy can look like, and how we can still feel connected, and how we can still enjoy each other's touch and each other's bodies without it being the same script that we had before. And sometimes that does require, you know, grieving some of the stuff that's no longer there. Like we've talked about before, this idea that like my body has changed. I don't know what's possible moving forward. Because a lot of times we grieve like this is the end of our sexuality and this is how it's going to be forever. And we don't know how things are going to evolve in an ongoing way. So we can't grieve for that in its entirety. What we can say is that things are different, and I can feel that, and I can experience that loss and then move on to what's possible. And that's why I do encourage people to continue to explore each other in sensual ways, you know, and enjoy each other in that capacity, because the more that we're able to really connect to our sensory experience, our sensuality, the more other things start to sort of emerge. And again, it may not be as like boom pow sensation that you knew before, but we can also really come into and start to really revel in and enjoy the more subtle, more nuanced stuff that begins to show itself. And, you know, and these are also opportunities to understand. We talk about like erogenous zones in the body, and the whole body has the potential to experience pleasure. And again, pleasure is a huge spectrum, and it can be really, the sensations can be really big, or they can be really subtle and very soft and different. And so really sort of getting to know the terrain of each other's bodies differently, exploring each other in that way, I think is an important part. And allowing yourself along the way to feel what comes up as you do that. And again, hopefully we're in a safe connected relationship in order to be able to do that piece, because it is a really important piece. Like, oh, here's a part of my body that previously responded in a really big way to this kind of touch, and it's not. And I need to feel that. And that's really hard. And how can I do that while staying connected to my partner? Because we tend to, when we feel big feelings, a lot of us have learned growing up that we do that in isolation. And so we struggle really being vulnerable and really coming into our relationships. And so I like to encourage people to, like, even if you have to turn away, but we're holding our partner's hand, staying connected through that experience, because that's also intimacy building. Intimacy is lots of things coming together, but it's the good, the bad, the hard, everything. This is the knowing, right?
I love that you're saying that. And there's a lot of chat in the show, which is wonderful. What people are saying, that you're touching upon really important things right here, because this is the truth. And I think, listen, in the breast cancer community, we do suffer amputations, right? And amputations can come in a lot of ways. And sometimes we feel like our sexuality was amputated. But I love what you're saying, because you're saying you're focusing on what you're not seeing, what you're not feeling. You're focusing on that, oh, I used to go 0 to 100 in my libido, or I used to have sensation in my breasts, or I used to have breasts, or I used to have a uterus. I don't have these things now, therefore I cannot be in any way. Yeah. And you're saying, no, you can, but you've got to not focus on what was so much of the body before and the pieces that you're finding of the body now.
Exactly.
It's really beautiful.
What exists here today and how it evolves in an ongoing way. And I really do feel that the more that we come into the body, and events like ovarian cancer, breast cancer, again, they challenge us to really look at our body and be with our body in a completely different way than we had been before. And so now we're here, and let's continue. And it's hard because, again, you have to do what you have to do, and you have to take the time that you need to take to feel these hard feelings. And there are times where you do not want to be connected to your body in any capacity, where you want a great deal of distance from it, where it feels like I'm out of control of what's been happening here, and I want out of it. And that's very real, right? And we, again, moving through these feelings, giving ourselves permission to feel all of it, and then taking the time that we need at the pace that we need to slowly come back in. If sexuality and sensuality are important parts of your life at this stage, then we go really slowly and we come in and we get to know what is there. And we do absolutely include our imagination and our fantasy life, because arousal and sexuality are so much more than hormones. Even though hormones play a huge role, it's more than that, which is why we don't just have an easy peasy, here, take this pill and you're going to get aroused and turned on. We don't have a quick fix for this, because it's such a combination of so many things that come together that create desire and create arousal and sensation. So
and I do think women in general, more than men, and I'm going to just throw it out there, put much more mental pressure on the whole process.
Oh yeah. And pressure, as soon as we feel anxious, stressed out, or any amount of pressure to do or perform or be or feel, we have kind of cut ourselves off from sensation and from our experience, because now we're in our headspace. And this is also like the number one cause of sexual dysfunctions, number one cause of the sexual dysfunctions that I work with, whether it be sexual pain or erectile dysfunction, or, as soon as we move into that headspace, we've almost gone into a bit of fight or flight rather than stay and play. These are at odds.
Oh, I love that. That's a great way of saying it.
So true, and it's a really interesting thing. Our whole arousal, sexual functioning process lives in our rest, digest, sleep response, which is why people get erections in the middle of the night or first thing in the morning, or feel especially saucy in the middle of the night, because we're not anxious, we're not stressed out, we don't feel pressure. So figuring out ways of alleviating the pressure so that we can really just be present and really, again, get to know sensation in our body in a more nuanced and a deeper way is so hugely important.
So we hear a lot of stories in the community for instance, where say a woman has gone through multiple surgeries on her breast, okay, and she has no sensation, or the sensation she doesn't like, it's odd, whatever it might be, and maybe her partner was really into breasts, right? So now the partner wants to do business as usual, and that's what turns me on, but that doesn't work for her anymore. Yeah. And the discussions don't really seem to be connecting. Is that where you say, look, this isn't going to work anymore? Or, you know, is this where you seek out therapy and say, we got to figure this out?
Yeah, get thee to a sex therapist, go to therapy. Because this, yes, absolutely. And, you know, and oftentimes the partner is not really understanding the significance of that experience, right? And not really connecting to what this means and what this may feel like or be like for their partner. And so it's really important in these kinds of situations. I think it can be incredibly helpful to go to a sex therapist and to learn how to engage anew, to learn how to engage differently. Because again, we all have such rigid scripts around our sexuality. Typically we start dating someone or we get into a relationship and like we do sex this way, and then we do it that way for forever, no matter how perfunctory or like boring it gets. Like this is just how it happens, which is like the big reason why people get into such ruts around it, right? Because we don't talk about it, because we're not nurturing it, taking care of it, just as like, this is how we do it. And as a result, when shifts like this happen, it's like, well, what do we do? I was a breast person and now my partner doesn't have breasts. Like, what do we do? This was like step 3 of our foreplay thing. And then we moved on to this thing, you know? And so a sex therapist can really help folks expand their repertoire of play, discover each other's bodies in different ways, and expand the repertoire. And sex therapists, a lot of them are incredibly trauma informed. And so they understand that a lot of folks have parts of the body that are off limits, and they're off limits for really profound, significant, meaningful reasons. And so we have to figure out a way of translating that information to the partner, moving the partner into a much more supporting position, and then finding other ways to play. Because as someone who works with people who are kinky and who have all kinds of different fetishes, and who, you know, because this fetish I wasn't allowed to have, I get fixated on it. Now this fetish is my whole sexuality. Our sexuality is just much more complicated than that. So even though your partner, you know, maybe was a breast person, breasts are no longer part of the menu anymore. There are other things inevitably that our partners enjoy, and we can't get everything we want from our partners all the time. Just is not part of the picture. There's no like perfect sex life for anyone. And so, yeah, your partner has to grieve too. And that's a hard process for them as well. But then, okay, we grieve. And now what's possible, like we talked about.
So you're amazing. And I just have one more question for you before we let you go and get back to the kids
so quiet.
In case they wake up.
It.
You deserve to take a mommy nap if you get 10 minutes. So we're going to give you the time.
I'm so excited I got to talk to you.
We love it. Our community loves it. So thank you. So what do you do if, okay, one partner is like, I'm not going to therapy, and the other partner desperately wants therapy?
Yeah. Oh gosh, it's like so incredibly common. It's so tricky, because what ends up happening is that like partner A goes, okay, fine, I'm just going to go by myself. And then they go and they're talking about the relationship in therapy, but the therapist doesn't get to deal with the relationship. Because really and truly, the therapist, when a couple comes in, the therapist is working with the relationship is the client, right? Rather than the individual people. It's a very different framework for how we do therapy. So when one person comes in and is talking about a relationship, you know, the therapist is in the position of having to go, you know, I can't work with that. I can't really speak to that because I'm not getting their perspective. I'm not getting their side of the story. I'm not seeing how this goes between the two of you. I'm not seeing you in the context of your relationship, which gives me completely different information, because, you know, a lot of us are on our best behavior on our own. And then when our partner's there, we're like, And so the real stuff comes out, that's the thing about relationships. It's like they're the ultimate mirror. You can't hide from yourself. So we're having, it's a lot of conversation about, like, we can talk about things that happen between you and your partner, but I'm going to be curious about how you're interacting with your feelings around it, how you're navigating your feelings around it, how you feel about your behavior in that circumstance, because I can't speak to your partner's behavior, what you would have done differently, those sorts of things, so that I stay on my side of the line as the individual therapist. Because what happens is, if an individual goes to therapy and is talking about the couple, and the therapist kind of goes there in a big way, the therapist will inadvertently kind of support them away or out of the relationship, which you can imagine would happen very easily, because it's like, we're there to support you. We're there to help empower you. And so, like a best friend would, like, oh, well, but we're hearing very biased information. So
do you ever send any questions like home with the person and say, well, you just if I can get this idea from your partner, do you really need to see them together?
Well, so, there are relational skills that we can work on in therapy with the individual. So none of us are particularly awesome at communication in relationships. We haven't been given a great blueprint for that. So there's always ways that we can, communication skills that we can work on. There are ways that we can talk about how to talk to your partner about going to therapy in ways that would be less reactive and activating, because again, a lot of times folks will come in and be like, oh, I told my partner that, like, they need to come because they've been behaving really poorly. And if they continue to do that, right. And I mean, that's like, of course, like, if we feel blamed, if we get defensive, like, we're not going to want to, participate or cooperate. So we can be really strategic around, I've been thinking about things that, that we've been struggling with lately. And I very much recognize my role in this. And I very much recognize how challenging it is for me in these situations. And I'm sure that you feel that to some extent as well. And I'm sure that there are things that you wish that I might work on doing differently. And so I was thinking it'd be a great idea for us to kind of come together and do that together with someone who doesn't know us, is not our, doesn't align with you, isn't aligned with me. And can really help us sort this out. So, using that kind of perspective or that kind of language can, like, help dodge the defensives and the reactivity around it that comes when you feel blamed or put on the spot, when you're able to, like when we lead with an apology and, it's like, oh, I understand, I should have done that differently. It typically inspires the other person to go, oh yeah, well, I was kind of a jerk there too. So when we lead with our own accountability, it can kind of open the door, or at least increase the odds that the other person might see from that perspective as well. Awesome. So there are things like that we can do to help move that conversation along. But if it's a no for the other person, it's a no, and that can be really challenging. But inevitably, no matter what, if you're working on yourself, and if you are doing things differently for yourself in your life, it makes shifts in your relationship. Not always, ones that make your partner happy. It's risky, but sometimes for the benefit of the relationship, a lot of times for the benefit.
Well, as always, Paula, you're just amazing. And thank you for your time, and that we got the little ones to take a nap this long is amazing. And Michelle, we have Paula's information on our website, correct?
We have it on our website. I will definitely add it to this link as well, so they can contact you directly and privately. Absolutely. And I'm kind of thinking we definitely need to do a Beautiful Self After Dark.
I would love that. Yes. I would love that.
Let's get down and dirty. Yeah. Let's get down and dirty and talk some real talk.
I would love that.
But this was very real talk. And thank you. Thank you for your time. You're a wealth of value and knowledge for anyone, especially our community where sexual dysfunction is very high. So,
oh, absolutely.
Thank you, my darling. You're amazing. We love you. Thank you.
Oh my gosh, I love you both. Thank you so much for working with me and my chaos today.
Of course. Like I said, we just work for the kids and the animals. That's it. So everyone, please, thank you for joining. Stay strong, stay positive. You are beautiful, and we will see you next week. Bye, everyone. Bye.
Bye.